So I was very fortunate to grow up in the Metro Atlanta area, which is well known across the country and around the world. It's kind of the epicenter and the center of human and civil rights advocacy. Martin Luther King Jr. was born and reared in Atlanta, Georgia, and kind of led the civil rights movement in Atlanta and across the country from Atlanta. And I've always been a student of that movement. Art, I had the great fortune of being mentored by most of the civil rights icons that worked very closely with Dr. King, including his wife, Coretta Scott King, and Jesse Jackson, and Joseph Lowery, Andrew Young, Hosea Williams, John Lewis, and Rosa Parks, Dorothy Height, and so many other great icons of the civil rights era. But I was born a decade after Dr. King was killed, so my ideology around social change, civil rights, social justice, human rights is more of a conciliatory one. I've learned over time that the best way to advance interests of justice is to collaborate with those who may not always see the world the same way that you see it. So when I started to see people in the midst of some of the law enforcement involved tragedies that have divided communities in law enforcement over the last decade, yelling and screaming, our lives matter, this kind of visceral, anger-based reaction to one another on all sides of these issues, I knew we needed to do something different. So Movement Forward, under my leadership, moved into the space of being bridge builders and goodwill ambassadors to actually figure out how law enforcement and communities can work together to solve problems, because as long as we focus our attention on the things that divide us, we'll never move our country forward. When we figure out how to collaborate around the things that unite us together, we find that there's more that unites us together than there is that divides us. And that's kind of the reason why we entered this space of doing all that we can in every type of community in this country to make sure that law enforcement has the best capability available to actually connect to and partner with the communities they serve.
We want to welcome everybody to another episode of You and the Law podcast. I am one of the hosts of the show, Virgil Green, and as always, I got to introduce the brother who sits next to me, who goes by the name of Chief Swaggy One, the ultimate beast. What's going on? Not a whole lot, brother. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's good.
You know, man, we got a beast on tonight. This brother. This brother's gonna take your place, man. He's a beast. He's a beast, brother.
No. He's a beast, but he ain't the ultimate beast.
All right. Well, hey, let's bring on our guest, Reverend Markel Hutchins. How you doing, sir?
I'm great, Chief. It's good to be with you both.
Yeah, man. It is our pleasure and honor to have you join us on our podcast. I know we've been trying to make this happen for quite some time, and we finally are able to get you on. And so it's definitely a pleasure and an honor. And I wanted to open up the podcast to give our listeners just a glimpse of who you are and what you are doing and have been doing with the organization moving forward. And I had the pleasure of attending the conference last year in Atlanta, the PLECET conference. And Rev, I keep telling everybody it's one of the best conferences I've been to.
Thank you, Chief.
Even on the level of IACP, it's because of just the connection and the networking and just the breakout sessions that you all had. It was good. It was
real good. Thank you, and I truly mean. I was thinking I was on my way to Orlando a couple of days ago to speak to a few audiences, and the next day I headed to South Carolina to speak to another group. And I said to my mom that as long as I've been speaking and preaching, I'm 48 years old. I turned 48 2 weeks ago, and I've been preaching literally since I was 8 years old. I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of audiences of every type. But every time I have an opportunity to share, it really is an honor, and it's a blessing that I don't take lightly. The fact that God has given me a desire to serve people is really something that I really appreciate, and that's kind of how we got into this space, just wanting to be of service and give voice to those who might not be able to speak for themselves. So I'm truly honored to join both of you tonight.
Well, we thank you. Thank you. So Rev, just tell our listeners about yourself, how you got involved with this with this movement forward, and all the other things you're doing. I know the intro. You we heard a lot about how you got involved with this here, but just who is Reverend Markel Hutchins, and because you got a story to tell.
Well, number one, I'm Dorothy and Leon's baby boy, and I'm Dominic's daddy, and that's those are the things that are most important to me. I grew up in Stone Mountain, which is, as most of your listeners and viewers will know, historically known for its ties to the Ku Klux Klan. My mother was reared in Stone Mountain during the height of segregation in the 50s and 60s. She could not attend Stone Mountain High School, which is obviously the local high school, because of the color of her skin. When I went to Stone Mountain as a student in 1991, as a freshman, the school had never had anything other than a white student body president. But in 95, I was elected. In 94, I was elected the first African American to ever be president of the student body at the high school that my mother could not go to because of the color of her skin. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of set me on a path of working around social justice, civil and human rights. And as a high school student, I became close to the likes of Coretta Scott King and Hosea Williams and Andrew Young and that whole generation of leadership. And although I was born a decade after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, he was really my role model, and really understanding that we had to cause America to be a better version of herself. And I think I've tried to spend my life in one way or another promoting the best version of America, not the condemnation, not the damnation of America, but causing her to live out the true meaning of her creed. And so for me, in this moment in time, the work around our criminal justice system, balancing the scales of justice, leveling the playing field, and keeping our community safe is the number one civil rights cause of our time. I say this often. The policing, crime, violence is the civil rights issue of our time. It's the most important issue because in our communities, in communities of color, in disadvantaged communities, and low-income communities, more young people are losing their lives at the hands of violence than anything else. So it's incumbent upon all of us that claim to embrace justice and truth and fairness to see what it is that we can do in every community and in every city to empower law enforcement officers to be the ambassadors of good for our communities. And that's kind of why we're doing the work that we're doing now.
Reverend Hutchins, let me ask you a question. Thank you for joining us, and also happy belated birthday.
Thank you, Chief.
So I'd like the question I have. So we know about community-oriented policing. We know that was supposed to be a bridge between policing and communities of color. That was the first step. So then, we came up with, we have 21st century policing, which really is a roadmap on how to improve. So my question is, with those two powerful foundations, why do you think that, or why do you believe, or think that we're still having this gap between law enforcement and communities of color? Because the roadmap's there. The studies have shown that there's still some separation there. But, with the roadmap, why is this still happening?
Well, I think that it's great to have a roadmap, but somebody has to read the roadmap and understand how to get where we're going. Okay. And I think that's one of the missing elements. The COPS office has given out grants. Community-oriented policing has been around in theory for 2 decades now, but it's never really been done effectively because unlike every other area of law enforcement, there's never been any sort of training or professional development as to actually the way, the effective means, the methods, the tactics, and strategies that need to be brought to bear to actually make community policing successful. Chief, 2.5 years ago, and I started to see the same thing that you're seeing. we built Faith and Blue Weekend to be one of the largest police community outreach projects in the history of our country. We started in 2020 with IACP, National Sheriffs, Noble, NALI, FOP, literally everybody working with us. But we would travel across the country and see that every agency we encountered, small agencies, mid-sized and large agencies, everybody wanted to do community policing. Everybody's committed to community outreach. They understand the need, but there was very little strategy, very little skill. There was very little success in that. And the reason why we came to understand is we have the roadmap. We have the report of the President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. We have the COPS office and all that community-oriented policing has been built to be. But nobody ever taught the profession, here's how to do it. Here's how to do it with excellence. And we've never given an opportunity for the officers that are assigned to community policing or community engagement to learn how to do their job. So if you are narcotics or forensics or even fleet maintenance, there's some sort of training, there's some sort of conference or professional development opportunity that's been afforded to you. That's never been the case for community policing or community-oriented policing. Never has been the case, which is why we created the PLECET conference. So I think in a lot of ways, the disconnect is a disconnect in preparation. So the agency knows that it's necessary to connect to these disenfranchised or disconnected communities, but how to do that has been something that's been a missing element. So, and I think we have an opportunity to fix that through training, and that's why we're doing what we're doing at the PLECET conference.
Yeah, well, you know, Reverend, I think there's so many agencies that says we are doing community policing. We're following the 6 pillars of 21st century community policing, but everybody is not doing. Somebody is doing something over here. Everybody's doing something different. There's not a standard to say, hey, this is what you need to be doing, and tailor this to your community. Because people can say we're doing it, but what are you really doing? How impactful is that in your community? And I think, you know, something we've talked about on our podcast show for the last 5 years is the fact that a lot of agencies say that they're connected to their community, but they're really not connected to their community.
Yeah, they may be connected to
and especially
their community.
Yeah, so you're right. But they're not connected to the right pockets. And the right pockets is those who look like you and I. And because there's just that trust that's not there. And I think when you go back and you see the things that have happened with so many names we can, you know, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, you know, Philando Castillo, George Floyd, all these things have happened, even going way back to, Rodney King. There's been so many things that have happened, and for whatever reason, we just in policing cannot get it right.
Well, the thing that I hear over and over again is we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this and doing that. But the question is, are you measuring it? Is it innovative? Is it impactful?
Yeah.
How is it impacting not just trust, but how is it impacting crime and violence? Is it an overall part? Is it a part of your overall public safety strategy? And if you're not if you're not measuring it, if you're not seeing the impact, then you might be following what you consider to be those 6 pillars. But if it's not effective, then how are you really able to say that you're doing what is necessary around community engagement? And you're right. The big thing that we've seen is that in most instances around community policing or community engagement, community outreach, whatever an agency calls it, most often, and excuse me for being this transparent, but it's like checking a box. You know, it's like we do Coffee with a Cop, check.
Yeah.
We do National Night Out, check.
Yeah.
We do Faith and Blue, check. We do a Citizens Academy, check. But if you're not reaching into the segments of your community that are not already supportive of law enforcement, then you're not really doing an effective job. So the need for innovation and changing, a lot of agencies, chiefs, are doing the same thing around community policing that they were doing a decade ago. And America is so different. The profession is so different. If an agency is doing community engagement and there's not a recruitment or retention or officer safety or wellness component to their community engagement, If an agency thinks they're doing community affairs and community engagement and it's not tracking along with crime reduction efforts, then I encourage folks to really re-examine and innovate what it is that they're doing.
You know what, Reverend Hutchins, you said something about check the boxes, and if you really think about it, a lot of these grants and opportunities, they don't provide any. The requirements are very broad, so there's nothing that says, well, you ensure that this percentage of your officers have gone through the proper. It's basically, I'm gonna get the money. We're going to say that we have this this program because it looks good, and I think until there's some the minimum requirements, I think we're going to still be having some of the problems that we were talking about tonight.
I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the things that we have that kind of prompted us to stand up the PLECET conference was, in most instances, an agency will get a grant or will decide we're going to do community policing, we're going to do community outreach, and they'll go get an officer who is either A, a problem officer, B, they pull an officer from another area in the profession or in the department that, maybe they weren't successful somewhere else, and they'll stick them in community policing or they'll stick them in community outreach. And so it's not always been treated as a professionalized and respected sector of the profession. And I think you can see the impact of that. One of the reasons why I think so many agencies have a difficult time with community policing or having effective community outreach is they don't pay it the same level of respect and give it the same training and attention that they do other areas of the profession. And if you don't train for it, you all know this better than I do. If you don't train for it, you'll never be successful when you get in the field. And that's what I think has been a major missing element and gap in the field.
I think the worst thing that can happen, we talk about a lack of sustainability. So we'll get a grant that's a 3-year grant. We'll do really well that first 3 years, and then after that, we forget about it because we're not going to be able to absorb the budgetary needs for it, or we just, nobody's paying attention to us. So it's about, I believe it's also about sustainability.
And it is, and mind you, that has to be the case at every agency. But I think because of where we are in the nation today, now I think as much as law enforcement agencies don't want to admit it, and as much as there are those in this political climate that want to act like things are the same as they were 7 years ago before George Floyd, or 5.5 years ago before George Floyd, I think policing is very different now. And we have to approach community relationships with a different degree of respect and a different degree of intentionality than we did pre-George Floyd. After I happen to serve and very proud to serve on the board of directors of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. It's the organization that honors the fallen. We have the Wall of Remembrance in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that the memorial does is we measure the number of officers that die by suicide in a given year. The year after George Floyd was killed and all the summer of animosity directed at the profession, all the attacks on law enforcement officers, all the attempted assassinations and things that were thrown at officers across the country, there were many officers that committed suicide, and thousands of officers left the profession. So I say that because I think agencies need to really embrace the reality that community relationships and public perception impacts every area of the agency, from recruitment and retention to officer safety and wellness to their crime reduction, and everything in between is impacted by public perception. So this idea of community focus is in the best interest of the agency broadly. And I mean that not just for local police departments and sheriff's offices. I mean state agencies, campus agencies, tribal, transit, literally across the board. Policing has to look at community relationships much more intentionally than we did perhaps a decade ago.
Yeah. Well, Reverend, one of the things we like to do on You and the Law podcast is just keep it real. And the one thing that we've talked about is that policing in America is one of the most segregated workplaces there is. And I've said this many times that we can train police officers to shoot a weapon, but we don't know how to train police officers to go in people's homes and help them deal with some of their social issues. We have a lot of social issues within policing that we cannot fix. So how can you go into somebody else's house and fix their problems until you fix your problems? But there's a segment of policing that doesn't really want to have that conversation because of just how controversial it is. I want to get your opinion because you deal with a lot of police departments all around the country, police department, sheriff department, local, federal, and state. What has been some of the things that you've seen as you travel around the country, whether it's a small agency all the way up to a major city, of just, one thing I heard Chuck Ramsey say about a month ago up here in Minneapolis is that we talk about the culture of policing needs to change, but what does that really mean? So just want to kind of get your perspective of what you've seen. What do you see is the culture of policing, and how has that kind of impacted or not impacted on some of the work that you are trying to do to bring that community and policing together?
I think policing culture depends on where you are. Policing culture, police culture depends on where you are. So the culture, for example, I was in Columbia, South Carolina a few days ago. That's very different culture than it is here in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's very different than it is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And so I think we run the risk of missing the mark when we kind of broadly talk about culture and policing, because culture is based on location in a lot of ways. I think there is, broadly speaking, there is, and I mean this honestly, there is a newfound respect for the need for community relationships and public input across the board in policing. But I think it was self-interest inflicted when all of that summer of protests happened in 2020 after George Floyd's death. Whether you're in a small all-white community in the Midwest and in a rural area, or you're in a major city like New York, Atlanta, Detroit, or somewhere else, you were losing officers. You were losing support. Animosity was directed at you because the American people across the board saw the murder of George Floyd as a condemnation on law enforcement, period. So no matter where law enforcement officers were in the aftermath of George Floyd, they felt the heat of that. So now, no matter where you are, no matter what the demographics of your community are, in most instances, police departments and sheriff's offices are beginning to see we have to do something different. And innovation, there is an appetite for innovation now that I don't think we've ever seen before. But I think in a lot of areas across this country, especially since, let's say, November 2024, people now believe that we, a lot of folks in law enforcement that may not look like you and I, believe that we can go back to an hour and an era where the cultural impacts of what a community may be facing can be ignored. And I think that's a short-sighted and very dangerous place that some law enforcement officers in some communities are entering. But Chief, I think I've grown past the place of cursing the darkness. I'm ready now to light a candle, which is why, I used to lead protests and marches and demonstrations, most of them against law enforcement. I helped to put corrupt police officers behind bars, and I'll continue to do that work if it's necessary. But there is a more excellent way. And the thing that we are committed to doing is when an agency doesn't know how to connect to the community, we try to put them in relationship with the organizations in that community that can teach that agency how to connect. Because you're right, a lot of times agencies don't know what to do and they don't have the capacity to teach themselves, and they need to turn to the community to teach them how to relate to that community.
Yeah. Hey guys, I want to let everybody know, if you're just now tuning into the podcast show, you're listening to You and the Law podcast. We've got on very special guest, the Reverend Markel Hutchins, the president and CEO of Movement Forward. And tonight we're talking about community engagement and policing in America. And if you got any questions, comments, put them in the chat. We'll definitely get those get those comments, reply to those throughout the podcast. But one of the things I want to kind of go back to is Faith in Blue. Oftentimes you don't see, and you just mentioned, depending on where you're at in the country, that Faith in Blue does not really connect. What has been through your lens, what have you seen how Faith in Blue has moved the needle to get agencies more involved with Faith?
So the reason why we started Faith in Blue was just what we were talking about just now. It is, in many instances, law enforcement agencies try to be their own goodwill ambassadors. And if a community already has some animosity towards the law enforcement agency or toward the profession broadly, you cannot go into a community and build relationships when there's animosity directed at you, unless you've got some folks that are goodwill ambassadors that can stand by your side. And a lot of times, law enforcement needs people in communities to speak up for them in ways that they cannot speak up for themselves. And that was the premise behind the creation of National Faith and Blue Weekend. There has never been a movement in the history of the United States of America that was not anchored in the faith community. The faith community has always been a source and a resource for change that is positive in our nation. And if we're going to see a reduction in crime, particularly in communities of color, if we're going to see better relationships between police and communities, if we're going to see any real progress around these issues that cause so many of our young people to end up in the criminal justice system, it will be because the faith community steps up and takes its rightful place in these conversations. The church has always been the epicenter of change in our community, and we've seen that slip away over the last several decades. So when we started looking at who is it that can in every local community be a light in darkness in terms of the relationship between police and communities, the faith community emerged as a likely resource and vehicle to do that. And that's what caused us to create Faith in Blue Weekend. And I cannot tell you, there are countless stories and that we hear where an agency is transformed because of the power of the relationship that they create with just one or two faith-based organizations in their local neighborhood. In many instances, the police officers that are policing in these communities don't know the culture of the community. They don't know the language, the lingo. They don't know the people. So giving them an institution where they can come to and get to know some of the people in that community has been transformative in a lot of instances. And that's why, Faith in Blue is still really young. It's just 5 years old. And we've grown that from concept to thousands of agencies across the country participating in thousands of activities. And we'll keep doing that. But, it's we didn't get to this place overnight. And we're not going to get to what Dr. King called the promised land overnight either. We have to keep working, and every generation has got to keep pushing and keep making things happen. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So, Rev, I got to tell you this. So last year when I was in Atlanta, I got a chance to go to the church, went through and as I was sitting there listening to Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, I'm sitting there and and it's almost like I'm looking at you. I mean, it was and when I got the opportunity to connect with you at the conference, and I'm just like, man, this brother right here is you. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but you say you've been preaching since you've been 8 years old, but you are as close to that to Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm 61. That and I was just amazed at how you the era that you have come up in and the people that Andrew Young. I mean, you've been close to a lot of, as you just mentioned earlier, a lot of icon in the civil rights era. And but I just had to tell you that sitting there in that church listening to that speech, I'm seeing you, but listening to Dr.
That's
Martin Luther
very
King.
kind. And I'll tell you, I really thank God. I've had a lot of people who have impacted me. John Lewis, Mrs. King, so many of those people that work very closely with Dr. King. And the highest compliment that I've ever been paid by a single person in this world was Mrs. King telling me that in a lot of ways I reminded her, even the way I sound,
Oh yeah,
reminded
yeah,
her
yeah.
of her husband. Now, for Coretta Scott King, I mean, it's one thing for my mama to say that, but for Mrs. King to say that, I mean, it's a different.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I just really want to be a good person. I want Dominic to know that his daddy did all he could to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people ask me very, very often, why aren't you more famous? Why aren't you this and that? I really want to be effective. So when I was leading marches and protests and things, I got to tell you the story. I was leading a protest one time in the aftermath of a 92-year-old woman that was killed by police. It was Katherine Johnson was her name.
Remember that?
And it was a horrendous shooting, a botched drug raid, and the Atlanta Police Department did some really bad things.
Oh yeah.
But the first call that I made when the family asked me to advocate for them, the first call that I made was to Richard Pennington, who was then the chief of police in Atlanta. He had been the superintendent of police in New Orleans. He had grown up in the Washington, D.C. Metro Police Department. But Chief Pennington and I were friends. And I called him and I said, look, Chief, this is what it is. Let's work together because I don't want to tear the community up because I know you and I can work together on this. And I had a lot of folks that said to me, why don't you just lead marches and protests and block the street? I had one of my mentors who I won't name. He said to me, man, instead of meeting with the police chief, why don't you go lay down on the train tracks, the MARTA train tracks, the public railroad or the public transportation. He said, go lay down on the train tracks, draw attention to the issue of what the cops have done to that 92-year-old woman, and you'll be on the front page of the New York Times the next day. And I said, if I do that, I recognize I'll be on the front page of the New York Times, but I probably won't be able to get the justice that the family deserves. And in the meantime, I'll tear up the Atlanta Police Department in a way that won't help the community because when a 90-year-old woman really does have someone breaking in her home in the community that Miss Johnson lived in, because it was and is a crime-infested community. When they pick up the phone and call 911, I want it to be a better police department, not a bitter police department. And depending on what my actions are as the civil rights leader that's out front, I can help determine whether it's better or bitter. So the bitter might mean that I'm more famous, but the better means that I'm more effective. And that's really what I think leadership should be doing. We've had a lot of public voices talking about police misconduct, talking about police abuse and police brutality. But not many of us have taken the step of actually trying to fix the problem. And that's what I've decided to do. I really want to see the problem fixed. And just marching and screaming, I don't think it's going to get us where we need to be.
So, Reverend Hutchins, let me Morehouse man. Is that correct? That's
That is correct. That is.
So there's something about the history of Morehouse graduates, and could you kind of talk about that, the foundation that you received? I know that you spoke about your parents, strong upbringing, man of faith, God since 8 years old. But talk about the history of Morehouse, the legendary walls of Morehouse, things like that. How did that help, or how did that prepare you?
There's no experience in my estimation that could really have given me the appetite to make a difference in the world like Morehouse College, and that's just the truth, particularly as an African American male, and not just from the leadership, the administration of the college, but mostly from my peers, my colleagues. Every Black male that I encountered that came to Morehouse College as a freshman, as I did, they came because they wanted to be prepared to make a difference in the world. If not, Morehouse is we got some bright guys there. We probably could have gone to, many other schools, but we all chose Morehouse because we wanted to be scholarly. We wanted to be as educated and as bright as we could be, but we also wanted to make a difference in the world. And that is one of the things that I think is exceptional and very different about the Atlanta University Center, and especially Morehouse College. So for me, Chief, the friends that I made, the things that we discussed, even in times when we were playing and having parties and things like that, we were as likely to go to a protest or a lecture as we were to go to a party. And it wasn't because, everybody was super smart, but we were super interested in making a difference in the world. And that is a legacy that existed long before I got to Morehouse and continues to exist many years since I've been gone.
I have never, I mean, that's one of the things that I've heard. I know quite a few young men who have graduated from Morehouse, and they have said the exact same thing that you just said, that it prepared them to go out and be leaders, and to continue to be leaders, strong leaders, and then pass that on to others. So it echoes from everyone who's attended Morehouse.
Yeah. Well, Reverend, a real good friend of mine, Kevin Perry, left Oklahoma City and went to Morehouse.
Good for him.
Him and his dad now own several radio stations in Atlanta. And he and I were talking a while back, and I'm like, did you ever think leaving Morehouse, coming back to Oklahoma City, running your family radio station, that now here you are having a footprint in Atlanta, owning several radio stations? He just never crossed his mind. I mean, it was, hey, I'm going to get my education, coming back, helping my dad build that family business of a radio station and a newspaper.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I'm not surprised, because one of the things that was instilled in us, and I think it's instilled in students at Morehouse to this day, that whatever you do it with excellence. Whatever you do it to the best of your ability, and don't take any shortcuts. And I think those lessons have lifted generations of Morehouse men to heights that perhaps we never dreamed of.
Reverend Hutchins, I have a question of Chief Green.
Oh, here we go, Rev. Here we go, man.
Chief Green, would you have had the GPA to get into Morehouse?
Oh boy!
Wait a second, man.
I'm not talking about adding all
have.
the GPAs of everybody in Hobbs together. I'm talking with you have had the GPA.
Hey, Rev, this man gonna give me a hard time. So I was born and raised in southeast New Mexico in a city called Hobbs, and so he gives me a hard time because he was raised in Dallas, in South Oak Cliff.
That's right.
South Oak Cliff. So I definitely would have had the GPA to get into to Morehouse. You probably would have had the GPA to get into Spelman.
I wouldn't mind.
Now, I know you wouldn't. I know you would not have.
I wouldn't mind going to Spelman. Hey, but Reverend, could you talk about the annual conference? I really want to make one of these years. I've heard nothing but great things about it, but Tell us how that's going.
Yeah, I told him last year he missed it, and this year I'm trying to pull him, but he'll.
But I just kind of want to know, how did that evolve, and where did you start? What was the attendance in the first year, and what has it grown to now?
Yeah, good question.
Well, I think I alluded to it a little bit ago when we saw that agencies didn't really know how to do community engagement well, and I'll give you the very thing that caused us to do Faith and Blue. I'm sorry, to do the PLECET conference. I went for Faith and Blue one year to a major city on the West Coast. It was in California. I won't name the city. The sheriff's office was super committed to Faith and Blue. The sheriff and his entire command staff was at this event that they asked me to come and be the keynote speaker. They used a church that they'd always used in an event format that they'd always used, and they wondered why there weren't many community members there. And it was really revealing to me, because you had 100% buy-in from the agency. They have a community policing or community outreach unit, and yet they were very, very ineffective in reaching the community. And I flew back the same day and did an event the next day in Memphis Police Department with Chief C.J. Davis, and they have a lieutenant. Now he's a captain, I believe, in Memphis Police Department, named Tadero Holmes. He leads their community engagement. I went to Memphis. They had about 40 Faith and Blue events, and all of them were super successful. And I think it's because, frankly, because Memphis does such a good job with community engagement that the city didn't burn in the aftermath of Tyre Nichols. I think if they hadn't had such a robust and successful community engagement model, Memphis would have burned when MPD officers killed Tyre Nichols. But when I saw the effectiveness of what Memphis did and the lack of effectiveness in what most major cities, even the major cities, are doing around community engagement, I thought to myself, how can I help? I've got a relationship with all the major cities, most of the major counties, and thousands of small agencies we touch with Faith and Blue. How can I get these smaller agencies and even the big ones that don't do a good job of community engagement to learn what it is that Memphis is doing? And that's where the concept of this conference was born, is allowing professionals that are responsible for community outreach and community engagement to come to a central place to get the best training from subject matter experts and scholars to understand why community engagement or community policing works, but what they need to do to make it work, and help them understand intergroup contact theory, help them understand this philosophy and the psychology behind community policing, community outreach. Because for most of the officers, even the line supervisors that are responsible for community engagement, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They just know they do it every year and they ought to keep doing it. And it feels good to them. But to understand the why behind these programs, and then be exposed to the best research, the best scholarship, the best technology that's out there, and be able to connect to their peers. And that's how the PLECET conference was born. And so we had this idea of doing it. And really, I went to IACP and national sheriffs and like I said, everybody else, and say, is there some sort of training? And everybody said no. And I said, well, let's do something about it. So we birthed the conference in 2023, just 2.5 years ago. It's amazing that just 2.5 years ago, this was nothing but an idea. And I thought if we had a couple of hundred people that would attend from across the Southeast, because we're based in Atlanta, we were going to do the first conference in Atlanta, that it would be successful. Well, almost 1,000 people showed up in Atlanta from all 50 states the first year. First time this conference was ever done. And of course, we partnered with everybody, so everybody was promoting it and all that. The second year, 2024, the number almost doubled to almost 2,000 people from all 50 states, plus the U.S. territory, Mexico, and Canada came. So when we saw that this was a real gap and a real need in the profession, we knew that was something that had to keep going. So this year, for 2025, the PLECET conference, or Professionalizing Law Enforcement Community Engagement Training, is going to be in Chicago, June the 4th through June the 8th. It's a 5-day conference starting with an opening reception on Wednesday, June the 4th, going on through classes and plenaries. And it's not just us, Chief. We've built a big tent. So it's our organization, but we bring in everybody. Coffee with the Cop, National Night Out, Clippers and Cops, the National Crime Prevention Council, law enforcement, all of the national organizations that do community engagement alongside law enforcement, they're at the PLECET conference. In addition to them, all the national law enforcement groups will have their own seminars. So Small and Rural Law Enforcement Executives Association will do a session focused on the unique needs of community engagement in small agencies. IACP will do one on their trust building campaign. Major county sheriffs, Noble, Nolly, Hapcoa, everybody will come together. So I really, every agency, in my estimation, could really benefit from what is offered at the PLECET conference. And we spare no expense. I mean, we spend tens of thousands of dollars bringing in experts, the top experts in these subject matters. And we do these training classes. We got 16 classes, not workshops, not sessions, classes that are going to be instructed. So it's a bang up conference, and I hope everybody will go to the website. It's PLECETconference2023.org, PLECET conference 2025, .org, and get all the information, see the video. It really is a good conference.
Yeah, well, it is. And, everybody that I talk to up here in the Minneapolis area, I've spread the word and said, hey, if you don't know anything about it, here's the website, go to it, send it as many people as you can to Chicago, because that's just how much I believe in it. And so, I'm committed to it. And obviously, being a member of, what is it, LECEN with Kevin. And so talk about the group that you have around you, because they do a lot to really help support moving forward in the PLECET conference, in Faith and Blue, and all these other things that you have.
So I have a wonderful team. I mean, you can't do this. And to me, it's a God-given team of people that are as diverse as America is. I have, members of my staff who are from the Middle East, and those who are of Hispanic descent, and Jewish and Black and white, and, young and old. I've got a good group of folks who are all believe in the work that we're doing. So out of the conference, we've developed something that you mentioned, the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Network, because what we realize is if you're a chief of police, or if you're any other area of law enforcement, you're able to rely on your peers for advice and counsel, and to toss ideas back and forth. But the people that do community policing or community engagement, they've never had that opportunity. They're just they're just forced to figure it out by themselves and try to do the best they can. Well, we know that there's a need to change that. So we formed this network, the Law Enforcement Community Engagement Network, that continues the work and the professional development that we start during the PLECET conference, or that we do during the PLECET conference every year, and carries that work forth all year round. So again, I really, all of your listeners, all of our viewers, everybody that's joining us tonight and that will see the replay, I hope they will go to PLECET Conference 2025, PLECET Conference 2025.org. Check out the video, check out all the resources, and help us spread the word, because I truly think that community engagement is the wave of the future when it comes to the success of law enforcement agencies.
One of the things I've said, Reverend, is that community engagement has been that piece that's been missing in policing. And I think you know that, you see that. The one thing that I've talked about being in the position that I'm in as a police chief is that oftentimes you see sheriffs, police chiefs show up just for the photo op and they walk away. They don't have any real buy-in, connection to it. But they want everybody else to have something to do with it, but they're just not that connected to it. Speak on how important to you that is, that people who hold positions like me and Chief Humphrey and Sheriff, like last year you had Sheriff DeWanna Witt from Hennepin County. I think she was one of there was an award that you all, the Torch Award. speak on how important it is for leaders in our roles to really get behind and support
So,
this.
I think law enforcement executives, police chiefs, and sheriffs are a lot like preachers, which is why I get along with y'all so well. Uh, and
Well, I don't know. Hey, Rev, this dude in the middle, I
well,
don't know.
I'm
He ain't
telling you,
got
I've been
that.
preaching all my life. A lot like law enforcement executives are a lot like preachers. They're inherently
Yeah.
ego-driven people, right? We are. Dr. King called it a
Mm-hmm.
drum major instinct. We have a drum major instinct. It kind of requires that for you to ascend to leadership, particularly when you rise through the rank or when you come up through the ranks. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, oftentimes, because of that, we get short sighted and start to think that our showing up is the same as the agency engaging with the community. But community
Mm-hmm.
engagement or community policing should be an agency wide kind of concept that is embraced by every element of the agency. I'll give you an example. I had a police chief who's a female police chief, I'm sorry, sheriff here in Georgia. She and I were talking, and I knew she didn't have a community engagement unit. But I just asked her, I said, "Do you have a community engagement unit?" And she said, "Yeah." "How do you think I became known as the community sheriff?" And I said, I hope she doesn't see this because I like her a lot. But you're being known or you're holding yourself out, or the people in your agency calling you community sheriff, does not mean you have a community engagement unit. And I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
difference. And one of the things that is taught at the PLECET conference is, what is the difference between public relations, community
Mm-hmm.
engagement, community policing, and community affairs? It's very, very different. Community engagement is
Yeah.
so much bigger than public relations. It's so much bigger than just showing up at an activity and shaking hands and there's a lot of value in that, and I don't minimize that. Police executives should
Mm-hmm.
show up at activities in their community. But if that's all that the agency is doing, or if your community engagement is centered around the agency head, you're never going to be as effective as you should and could be. And that's one of the things that I think a
Yeah.
lot of law enforcement agencies misunderstand.
Yeah. 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 Well, there's something that I spoke on at one of the calls that we were on a while back with Kevin. Them was that I think executives in our position really people need to hear that, and I think having having the platform to speak to everybody, because people will say, "Oh, well, man, my chief showed up, so I got to be there," or my sheriff showed up. But how invested are you in it is important. And I think for me, because I put a lot of emphasis on the agency that I'm at now of community engagement. We don't have a lot of crime, but community engagement is probably about 90% of what we do. Uh, because again, we have the luxury, don't having a crime. We border Minneapolis, but we're able to do some things that you can actually measure from the people who come out to it. So again, I just think it's really important that people, again, if you're going to walk the walk,
And
talk the
that's
talk.
one of the things, we are in a full outreach mode now. So the team and I are working feverishly to make sure that every law enforcement agency in the country knows about the PLECET conference and is invited. And one of the things in my conversations with agency heads, the first thing that many of them say is, "I can't come because I have X, Y, and Z schedule." And my response is, well, the PLECET conference really is not about agency heads as much as it is
Mm-hmm.
about the people that do the work of community engagement in local communities. So any law enforcement agency head or command staff person that is watching us tonight or sees the rebroadcast, I encourage them not to just think about community engagement, the PLECET conference, or anything else in terms of what they are able to do. But there are people that are responsible at the line supervisor level, at the officer level for community activities. They're the people that need the sort of training that we're offering at the PLECET conference.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, hey, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the podcast. I want to remind those you're listening to You and the Law podcast. We've got the Reverend Markel Hutchins on, who's the president and CEO of Movement Forward. And we're talking about community engagement in policing in America, and the big conference is coming up in Chicago, the PLECET conference. So if you in law enforcement on here, and if you haven't registered, go register to attend the PLECET conference in Chicago. And I'm pretty sure that that social event that you're all going to put on is definitely going to match what was in Atlanta. That's
one of the highlights of. I don't know, Chief Humphrey, are you a cigar smoker?
Come on now, Reverend.
Yeah,
absolutely. hey, I'm absolutely. I'm a cigar. I have a cigar room at the house.
But where you at now?
Where am I? In Memphis.
Memphis. Okay. Next time I come to Memphis, I want to see that cigar room, because I'm a big connoisseur. But on Friday night of the conference, and all of it is around professional development, because here's the thing that I saw as I was, getting integrated into this space. I would go to IACP and see that on Chiefs Night, the sharing of information and ideas and perspective that the chiefs are able to exchange with one another as you were sitting at the bar drinking or outside smoking a cigar, that is something that is really, really valuable to a chief. And that's valuable to those that do community engagement as well. So in addition to all the classes and everything else, we build a lot of networking and social time into the PLECET conference. So on that Friday night, we have a big party that's akin to Chiefs Night. So we have live music, a live band, we have the DJ, we have excellent food, down home food. We have cigars and hookah and dancing and casino games and yard games. So it's a big, big party, and it's a great time, but it's also an incredible opportunity for the officers and others that come to the conference to get to know each other and to exchange ideas.
Reverend,
yeah. So, Rev, you see that comment.
Reverend, hold on a second. Virgil, if you read that comment from that person, you're gonna
what?
The comment says, man? Please come to Memphis so he can tidy up his cigar room.
Wow.
There you go, Rev. Wow. There you go, Rev. Right on, bro.
Wow.
That picture, that's a pretty lady. That must be your daughter. Is that your daughter, Chief?
No, sir.
Oh, okay.
Man, you're going to be in trouble when you get back home,
listen.
Man.
But, Pastor, thank you. I do. You said something earlier, and I want to double back to that. And you said it. The head of the department sets the tone. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I've preached that in each of the jobs that I've had. And I want to tell you where my passion for community-oriented policing started. When I worked in Arlington, Dr. T. Bowman and Chief David Kunkel, that was their philosophy. They taught officers how to be problem solvers, and they taught officers how to be community oriented. And every officer from day one of that academy, you were taught how to be a problem solver. You should not have to ask a supervisor to come out and make a common sense decision for you. Your main focus is, how do you teach the community to be safe? How do you teach the community to have to want to be better? As officers, we knew that. We knew that we had to find some way to make every call we went on to have a successful ending, if possible. And so I think that as a chief, you have to set that tone. When you can't have these meetings out in the public, and you can't talk about, we believe in our community, we want to work with our community, and then you go back behind closed doors and you're bad-mouthing the community that you're trying to get to buy in. So I'm glad that you said that, because I'm a firm believer that the head of the organization and then the head of the city has to hold that head of the police department accountable in order to make sure that they are treating people with fairness, procedural justice, 21st century policing, making sure people feel comfortable when they call us. That if nothing else, even if you can't solve their problem, you're going to demonstrate respect.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's you hit the nail on the head. You really hit the nail on the head. It has to come from the top, but it also has to come from the bottom up. So I say to law enforcement agency heads all over the country, if you want a successful community engagement unit or community policing unit, give your officers the tools that they need to be successful. And that is something that I think is critically important. Again, not just around relationships, around trust, but also if you don't have the community standing with you, there's no way in this environment you're going to be effective at driving down crime. It has to be in collaboration with the community.
Yeah. Rev, you guys get a lot of support to help put on this conference. Just kind of speak briefly on that corporate support that you have, that relationship that you've built to put this conference on, because this is a sustainable conference. This is something that we'll be talking about even after we retire. That I see this conference building and building and building, but just kind of speak on the corporate support that you have.
We couldn't do it without corporate support. I mean, this conference is not like, most conferences in law enforcement you go to, people just submit proposals and say, I want to present on this and I want to present on that. And then, somebody says, okay, yeah, you can present at this hour, that hour. That's not the way we handle the PLECET conference. We treat this as a genuine training conference. So each one of the 16 classes that I told you about, we hire an instructional designer that looked at what is needed in the field. So things like community engagement 101, how to create a strategic plan, how to effectively hold impactful community events, understanding intergroup contact theory, which is a theory in psychology that helps us to understand that when you put different categories or different groups of people together, that's where you have problem-solving capability. So anyway, these 16 classes have 4 to 5 expert presenters, expert instructors for each one of those classes. Now you multiply 16 classes times 4 or 5 instructors for each one of the classes, and we have to fly all of those people in. We have to house them. That's tens of thousands of dollars alone. Then we feed all of the attendees. All the meals are included with a $399 registration fee. It's a lot. And you're right, we could not do it without Motorola Solutions is, the most trusted brand in public safety. Motorola Solutions is the corporate presenting sponsor of the PLECET conference this year. The chairman and CEO of Motorola Solutions, Greg Brown, is our corporate chair. And companies like Target and Glock and Delta Airlines, and the list goes on and on of companies that are supportive of the PLECET conference. But I think everybody kind of knows that if we don't really do something to improve the relationship between law enforcement and communities, we'll continue to see the tensions and we'll continue to see crime and violence escalating. And they're right. This is not just a police problem. This is a community problem. It's a business community problem. It's all of our problem. And that's, I think, why we have so many companies that are eager to support the work we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this just before we sign off, what we saw with Sonia Massey in Illinois was tragic. And it's just another reminder of just this work that we're doing in policing has a long way to go. But the community wants good policing, but we just need to make sure we got the right people in the right places to hold. We need to hold our people accountable, and we need to be able to be out in front and be transparent with the public and not make excuses because the public sees that.
And I think you're right. And I think one of the things that law enforcement leaders have to do is hold themselves accountable. Yeah. You cannot send police officers into the field and ask them to do a job and not give them the training and the support that they need to do that job.
Correct.
And so, you know, there are a lot of agencies and a lot of communities where the politicians are, you know, decreasing budgets and trying to cut this and cut that from agencies. Police departments need leadership that have backbone, that can go to the city council, go to the county commission and say, no, you cannot cut my budget because here's what is going to happen as a result of that. And if you're in a leadership position and you don't have enough courage to stand up for your officers and give them the resources, the training, and every other tool that they need to be successful, then you shouldn't be in leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Rev, again, we definitely thank you. We're honored to have you on our podcast, and I know I will see you in June at the PLECET conference. And
You gotta rub that in, man.
well, yeah, you know, but you know what, man, this is what I'm gonna do right here, Rev. I'm gonna bring in back some cigars.
Well, Chief, if you can't come, you ought to at least make sure somebody from your agency is able to take advantage of it.
I will definitely try to do that, Reverend. I promise you that. I will try to do that.
Yeah. So Rev, again, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on, and again, looking forward to the conference. And I know we'll be talking soon, but again, let me see. We got one more comment in here. Let's get to that real quick.
It's from my friend brother.
Yeah, great show. Yeah. All right. Again, Rev, we appreciate it. And we want to remind you, if you missed any parts of this podcast, that you can catch it on our YouTube channel, You and the Law podcast show. You can also catch it on Spotify. Wherever you listen to podcasting, you will search and find You and the Law podcast, and you can listen to the rebroadcast of this. But Rev, again, appreciate it. Thank you. I know you're very busy. You're flying all over the country doing great work. And again, it's been a pleasure and honor.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. All right.